Baby, baby.
Good evening, podcast listeners. It is your boy, NotoriousSA, aka Steve Anderson, aka Denied as Moot. It is November 21st, 2020, and apparently the election is still happening, at least in some people's minds. The president and his lawyers think the election is still happening, and it turns out a significant portion of people also believe it's still happening, only to find out that the election is in fact over. But is it over? Is it really over? What does it mean for something to be over? Well, as I like to do on occasion, I like to start this off with a sports reference because I feel like that makes it easy for some people to understand. Imagine we're watching, and I'll just go with my usual, an NFL football game. Two teams, take your pick, whichever one you want, wherever you want. Let's just say that these two teams, wherever they want to be, we'll just say, I don't know, Team Biden and Team Trump. We'll just do that for fun. Let's say it is the fourth quarter. We are at the 2-minute warning, and Team Biden is up 38-14 with 2 minutes left. Now, imagine we drop that down to 10 seconds left and the score is still the same. Is the game technically over in either section? No. But there's a difference between the 2-minute warning being over and 10 seconds being over. In neither case is the game actually officially ended, quote unquote, because there was still time on the clock. But for the practical purposes of deciding who was going to win the game, the odds become insurmountable for Team Trump to score the necessary points to tie and or overtake Team Biden. And sure, it's theoretically possible for them to score 24 points within 2 minutes. It's not possible for them to score within 10 seconds. And if it sounds like I'm going too technical with this in regards to who has actually won the game, it's annoying, isn't it? But that's what I'm hearing from other news sources that I'm listening to. And mind you, while I do just try to consume as much information as possible from every different imaginable angle to improve my understanding of the world, the conservative news sources that I frequently check, whether it's conservative talk radio or conservative host on the internet or people that CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News bring up, there seems to be this persistent attitude among many of them that because there is still technically time on the clock, they can say with confidence the election isn't over. And because there's still some time in which theoretically something could happen that could change the results of this election, that they don't have to do things like say that Joe Biden is the projected winner, or that Trump is being a sore loser, or that we should even have the beginnings of a transition process beginning, because as long as there's some legal challenges available and until the official votes are certified, and from what it sounds like they're just going to keep pushing that all the way up until the Electoral College, is that they can pretend and give false hope to people that the election isn't over. I don't really have to tell you that the legal effort that the Trump campaign is trying is every negative verb you can imagine, every negative adjective you can imagine, as in it's useless, annoying, irrelevant, not anywhere close to the scope of what they claim, false, while simultaneously arguing in courts of law something very different from what they're telling the public and the media sources that are covering them. And unfortunately, and I'm going to do this part first just because I want to get it out of the way, to remove any kind of credibility that those who are still down the election may think that they have in this scenario. I guess the election is not, quote unquote, technically over. As in, there are still these legal challenges that the president is initiating, which are often baseless and meritless and are just a waste of everybody's time. There's the actual physical process of counting all the votes in all the states, in which some states are taking a bit long than others due to the large backlog of votes that they have to go through, which includes mail-in and provisional ballots. And of course, there is the actual process in which the electors, i.e. the Electoral College, assembles in state capitals to vote the will of the state, and then for that information to later go to Washington, where the official counts are made and the actual vote that decides the presidency is cast. And we're long past the point where, in my mind, it does any good to humor people about the possibility of Trump still being the president come January 20th. For everybody who's listening, which apparently, according to my analysis, is 3 people, so thanks all 3 of you for being here. If one of you believes that Donald Trump is still going to be the president after noon on January 20th, you are mistaken. He will not, in fact, be president because he has lost an election by a substantial amount of votes. Legal, perfectly valid votes that are not going to get thrown out and that are not going to get changed. And while we are still in the final stages of the last bits of collection of votes for challenges to be drawn up and brought in before the official certification results go in to things like the National Archives and different state legislatures, while that process has not itself been completed, the idea that that process can result in substantial changes to who won is so unlikely that I would rather you try to buy a lottery ticket and get hit with lightning at the same time, because there are better odds of that happening than of Donald Trump being able to become legally elected president again after this term is over. And look, if you supported Trump, this isn't to hate on you or call you stupid or try to just belittle you in any way, shape, or form. I'm just relaying the facts to you. And if you're going to come at me with something that you saw on Parler or OAN or one of the radio hosts and Fox News hosts that still hold the president in high regard and are contemplating this lunacy either for their own benefit or to spite other people, I want you to know that I trust you with information more than they do. Because clearly, it's in their interest to perpetuate the idea that the president still has a shot to become president again, because they want you to listen to them. Because I'm sure if you think that every network has abandoned you and the president, that you're going to go anywhere where you believe that they are being treated fairly and give you the idea that there's still some sort of chance for this can happen. And I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, these adults who are apparently lawyers, but sound like completely insane people when they talk about votes being transferred overseas and then changed and then scrubbed, and then there's algorithms that are flipping votes by certain percentages, but it only applies in certain states. As if it's not the most blatant, obvious attempt to just try to just throw out all the votes in general, whether they were for Biden or for Trump, and to just have these states select their own electors who would be pro-Trump electors for just the apparent reason that Trump won in a landslide, but there's so much fraud that we can't actually prove that, except for the part where we can prove that, but I can't show you any proof because you're just going to be mean about it. Like this Kafka-esque nightmare that they're trying to create, where they can build as many roadblocks between themselves and reality, will only result in more mental anguish and heartbreak down the line. When you see Joe Biden become the 46th president of the United States at noon on January 20th. That is going to happen. No amount of Twitter conspiracy or other nonsense that you can show me will matter at all, because when I see any court and any judge give the slightest hint of credence to anything they're saying, then maybe I'll listen. But from what it appears, as I mentioned in my AKA segment earlier, every judge is dismissing these cases outright in furious language that they would maybe not normally hold, except for the blatant disregard of the law and the facts that the Trump legal team is perpetuating to try to appease the feelings of a man who can't accept the fact that he lost. Now let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about the fact that there is reporting that Trump knows that he lost, but is continuing to do this fight anyway, because he feels aggrieved by everyone who's ever been mean to him. And again, falsely claiming that the previous administration, the Obama administration, did not give him the courtesy of a transition, which again is not true. What is happening is that Donald Trump, the man, is purposely dragging out this fight to show people that he is a quote-unquote fighter, even if it's against the interest of the United States as a whole for our continuance of government. The fraud that they speak of is so small, to the point where the focus on it and anybody excusing this behavior because it should shine a light on all the quote-unquote illegal votes that are there, are just giving credence to a man who is merely trying to throw out the entire system because it did not go his way. It's disrespectful, it's un-American, and it is dangerous. For a lot of people who are, I would consider them in the anti-Trump camp, what they're basically trying to say is, just relax everybody. If he's going to bring these challenges, and if they don't pan out, then they don't pan out. And we'll see what happens, and we'll keep all the options open while twisting themselves in circles to avoid even mentioning the idea that Joe Biden is going to be the next president of the United States, which he will be. This is going to happen. And the idea that there are people who themselves are, I will say, smart people, they're lawyers, they're political analysts, they know exactly what's happening. And that's why they're going at such great lengths to either avoid having the conversation about the election being over, or switching topics to how unfair the Democratic Party and the left and the media have been to President Trump this whole time. And of course, the idea behind this is to not directly engage with the president's most hardcore supporters who do legitimately believe that this election was in fact stolen. That they do legitimately believe, for some reason, that Joe Biden could not have and did not in fact win more votes than President Trump. And some will say it was actually a landslide that was turned into a somewhat closer contest for some reason. Some will not mention the fact that it only applied to the presidency and not the Senate or House seats or different General Assembly seats. I won't even mention the fact that the dots that are being painted and the lines trying to connect them are so far-fetched that it boggles the mind to think about them. Is that the idea that this charade is being carried on for commercial interest or political interest, or the selfish, cynical notion that of course this will end and Trump will lose, but I might as well ride this cash cow while I can, is just disgraceful. It doesn't do anybody any good for this to happen, particularly in the middle of a national emergency that is the pandemic and the economic collapse from from said pandemic, where now would be the time for somebody who's on the way out to probably do their best to leave with a somewhat good impression. But instead of doing that, and even talking about the fact that the president got the most votes of any sitting president and the second most votes of any candidate ever, or even talking about the accomplishments, or yes, talking about how the polls were off and it was much closer than expected, instead of trying to do the thing where you spin the good parts of your defeat as the actual victory while not acknowledging that you lost, he's just saying he didn't lose at all in the craziest nonsense ways imaginable. And yes, there have been some Republicans who have come out and said, this is bad, don't do this, it's bad for the country, we know Joe Biden won the election, we're looking forward to working with him. And there are some who, again, are purposely going well beyond reasonable doubt to give the president cover for his challenges, saying he has the legal right to do this, and the media doesn't actually pick the president, the certification and the votes do, as if 4 years ago, 8 years ago, as if every other time this has happened, we were totally okay with calling it when it was pretty obvious what was happening. But right now, even when it's obvious what's happening, we're deciding to give him far more leeway than we would give anybody else because we're afraid of him and we're afraid of his voters. Even though you shouldn't be. He lost. He lost, and you won, most likely. The fact that you're hearing all this talk from the left and the Democratic Party about how they weren't as successful as they thought they were going to be, and just the general sadness to think that if the Senate remains in Republican control, then what was the point of the whole process in the first place? As if having somebody in charge of the executive branch of the government and being, the most powerful person in the world wasn't a major step in the right direction. And sure, you could argue that if I have divided government, it doesn't really matter. But clearly it does, because when divided government came with Trump, it definitely changed the entire conversation. There were shutdowns. There was an impeachment. There was a whole host of issues that did not get resolved. And what we saw is the Democrats maintain their majority in the House, even though it was a smaller amount. The Senate is essentially a coin flip now, based in Georgia, where my guess is that the Republicans will win, but it's still possible that one or two of those seats could go either way. And if it's both of them, and the Democrats have a 50-50 split with Vice President Kamala Harris being able to split the tie, then all of a sudden, would you look at that, they have a trifecta in power. And who knows? That's going to be in January before we know this. But the idea that they think that they somehow lost by not winning as much as they wanted to really indicates that the president has support, and not even just that there are people who really do not like the idea of the other side of the political aisle having complete control over our government. The fact is, for all of you people who are mad, and for the polls which apparently show Republicans not believing that Joe Biden won, I'll have you know that a solid at least 30% of the Republican Party acknowledges reality that Joe Biden won. I can tell you that while the exit polls showed roughly 6% of Republicans voted for Biden, that Trump underperformed Republicans in certain swing states, meaning that Joe Biden was able to capture Republican voters to vote for him while splitting their tickets. So, if you're already the smaller party and don't have a lot to hold on to, but the structural advantages that you have, losing people is not your best position. But that's exactly what Trump did. You can say he gained votes. That's true. But Joe Biden gained way more votes. And the idea is that if people were, in fact, totally partisan, and everybody who considered themselves a conservative Republican voted for Trump even if they didn't like him or found him distasteful, then it's possible Trump would have won. And if Joe Biden wasn't the nominee, I'm convinced more than ever that none of them would have won. That it uniquely took Joe Biden being the nominee to give people the infamous permission structure to stop voting for him. Independents and people in the suburbs, these people voted for Biden. And yes, the president and Republicans increased their numbers with Hispanics and African Americans. And in some places that made a difference, but in other places, the suburbs, which are dominated by these either lean Republican, moderate Republican, independent professional voters, who helped decide, frankly, most elections, went for Biden. And that was a crucial strategy for them to succeed. That was absolutely crucial. But I digress. I guess the question that I want to propose to everybody, but sure, if you're a Trump supporter, if you're a Republican, whoever's listening to this, what's going to happen next year? Because eventually, Donald Trump will no longer be the president. That title will no longer be valid. His Twitter account will no longer be @POTUS. His wife will no longer be @FLOTUS. The cabinet secretaries, the heads of the executive that are picked by Joe Biden will come in, and the entire landscape of the executive branch will be very different from what it is now. And there is a real question of, when Trump is no longer the president, when he no longer commands the office, will he still have the same media impact that he did while he was president and beforehand? I don't think so. Part of the reason Trump was successful in getting to where he is was his ability to dominate all aspects of media, whether it be circumventing traditional media fact checks through Twitter and other social networks, whether it was his shamelessness and bombastic showman style that the media frankly was partnered in for years before he became president. And it was the Republican Party that, through its sheer size and apparatus and ability to function to win elections, helped get him into office in the first place. And frankly, all he's done since then is take credit where he deserves no credit and shift blame where he deserves all the blame. And his unique capacity to capture attention has slowly decreased over time. What does that mean? It doesn't mean he doesn't generate headlines and doesn't get play on different social media networks, but the primary difference is that now, whereas in 2016 the media essentially just ran Donald Trump unfiltered, unedited for ratings, and the internet and Twitter and Facebook just let anybody run anything and say anything of prominence and importance without much clarification or fact checking, that world doesn't exist anymore. The president's tweets are all being labeled with flags about information being incorrect. Tweets are being hidden. One of his tricks to avoid censorship of his ideas was to use Twitter and other social media, and now the same social media, seeing the immediate backlash they get from him being able to say whatever he wants without consequence, has started to, in a, I would say, a pretty fair sense, tame and pare back his ability to generate that kind of attention that he so desperately craves. I think these social media companies have done an excellent job, frankly. While there have been missteps, they've done an excellent job in helping to curb and fact check wild claims that people are still going to share and believe. But having these places provide context and different ways of looking at it will, I think, encourage a lot of people to think twice before sharing blatant misinformation, or maybe even looking into the subject a bit more and come to a better understanding of it. And now, the media, after having learned its lesson, essentially no longer covers the president in a way that is suitable to him. Whereas some places like Fox and OAN and other places will, if the president is speaking, for example, just play his remarks without interruption, versus other networks may have him in this corner of the screen, but essentially they'll just have people fact-checking him in real time and put him off to the corner and talk about him as more of a sideshow than being the center of attention that he so desperately wants to be. Now we even have people talking about Fox News falling off because they dare to do things like report the facts and report the election results accurately. The idea that somehow calling Arizona early affected the election is obviously ludicrous. The fact that Fox News is somehow being blamed for undermining the president is also ludicrous. And frankly, I give kudos to Fox for being able to, in a lot of cases, sort of maintain its dignity in regards to what is happening in regards to the election. And yes, some of the opinion hosts have gone out of their way to provide comfort to President Trump, knowing that he and his fans are watching, demanding that they hear something that affirms their worldview, on Laura Ingraham or Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity. But the people who are responsible for the actual reporting at Fox, the people who are able to help cover these kind of stories, I give them credit for maintaining their dignity and for showing that even where the conservative media is fractured, there is still a large segment of it that's dedicated to quality journalism and reporting the facts. And frankly, what I think is going to happen in a post-Trump presidency world is that a lot of the mainstream media is just not going to really want to cover the president anymore. The Trump fatigue is very real. The people are burnt out on Trump, particularly while we're in the midst of a serious crisis in which 250,000 people have died, and he's taken no real responsibility to actually help. The Trump show became tiresome a while ago, and now it is no longer even fun to watch. It's more so painful and sad. Much like any series that has delayed its inevitable end and given episodes and seasons that are kind of pointless, plot lines that don't make sense, and really just kind of ruined what could have been a good ending. The Trump presidency is desperately trying to maintain its relevancy and show it fights, and just giving lots of people the impression that the election is still in doubt, which is the greater concern, is that we've had the most secure election in history. And according to some polling, large parts of the Republican Party just do not believe that. They refuse to believe that. They refuse to believe that Joe Biden could have actually won. Look, people protested when he won the first time. And on a personal matter, I said, where were you guys before the votes were counted? If you're so mad about him being elected, everyone should have voted. 4 years later, my position hasn't changed. If you're out on the street protesting because the person you wanted to win lost and you feel this is rigged, you don't have any evidence to prove it, I'm sorry. Facts don't care about your feelings. Ben Shapiro, who I am super disappointed in. Like these same people, and you know what? I'm going to take Ben as a personal example just because he's one person that I listen to probably a bit more frequently than other conservative commentators, just because some of the things he talks about I feel like are a bit more relevant. And he can definitely call BS on things in ways that I think other media won't. But the fact that he has gone out of his way to give the impression that there is some sort of valid path for the Trump presidency to continue just really is a betrayal of the whole facts don't care about your feelings persona that he supposedly built himself upon. The idea that he is trying to give credence and through the other conservative networks get people to talk about what parts of the process still remain and why these things are still considered to be serious definitely is overplaying the validity of the claims. If you want to spend 30 minutes talking about what an affidavit is, great. Go to law school. If you're going to talk about what is the practical implication of this on the election, and unless you can prove that it's going to be massive, what are we doing here? Why are we letting people who support the president continue to absorb the idea that maybe, somehow, this is not going to happen? And unfortunately, what it is for a lot of people, this president, this presidency, these 4 years, for them, this might be the only time that they feel like they had someone in the White House who would listen to them, or possibly cared about them, or at least hated the people that they hated and was able to fight back against people that they wouldn't be able to. And what you're seeing is the notion of their power slowly fading away. Much like an addict who has run out of product and can't re-up and is facing the withdrawals, these people refuse to accept the reality around them. They truly did believe that President Trump would win re-election in a landslide. And frankly, the performance of the president exceeding the expectations of the polls, and the idea that he was winning on election night, quote unquote, but only lost as time went on and votes were counted, gave them a pre-fed storyline that it was stolen. And they are still the majority of Americans, but the only reason that that power is being taken away is through fraudulent means. And it's sad because the same system that elected Donald Trump and gave them the ability to brag about having the presidency as controlled by one of their own will now lose to somebody that they either personally detest or find to be an insufficient vehicle against the people that they detest. Or frankly, they see that this might be their last chance at real power, and it's now faded away. Day by day, hour by hour, the hopes and dreams that they had of shaping the nation's future are slowly fading into obscurity. The same people who believe that 8 years of Barack Obama's term was invalidated by Trump winning are very unable to process Barack Obama's vice president becoming president in such an overwhelming fashion. It's just not something that they ever believed possible or could have conceived. And frankly, there were lots of people who fed that notion to them for their own profit, not giving any credence to the idea that Trump could lose, and that if he did lose, it could be through a legitimate election, even though that was always a possibility. And I'm sure for many people, if they thought Trump was going to lose the first time and defied expectations, then the second time would be the same, if not better, and it's not. It's not, and the president does a disservice to the people who care about him by maintaining this false bravado and outright deceitful, un-American campaign to try to overturn the election results. I don't want to call it a coup, because a coup would imply that there's some sort of violent, organized takeover of our government. What it is it's an inept, ill-advised, and un-American attempt to use the legal system to overturn the will of the voters by stating lies, exaggerations, and fraudulent claims about fraud to extend the possibility that this election was decided legitimately, so that even if they were to lose, the seed of doubt has been planted among people, among what appears to be millions of Americans, that the person who is in fact lawfully elected does not deserve to be there. And I suppose this is what our adversaries wanted when Trump was elected the first time, is that they wanted the trust in the institutions to fall apart. Because without America's institutions working, a large part of our diplomacy and our soft power and what makes America so valuable in the world is degraded. And for many people, when they saw that Joe Biden won, when you see multiple countries across the world celebrate with fireworks and bells and partying in the streets as if America was liberated by an ill-conceived adversary, you get the impression that they had a vested interest in who won too, and Joe Biden to them means an America that they can work with and do business with. It means one that's not so erratic based on one man's personality. And it is not an America first and America alone strategy of withdrawing from the world and saying to hell with the consequences of it. Part of me feels bad for people who have been so wrapped up in this world that they can't tell fact from fiction and have lost the ability to trust their own judgment and their own minds, because they set up the outcome first and then demand that the rest of the process meet the outcome. And unfortunately, that's a bad way to wrap your political strategies and your life around, because if the facts on the ground don't match the outcome, you're not going to be able to put the square through that round hole. You're not going to be able to make it work. And your brain will probably break as a result of trying to. Which, to me, is sad, because I would hope that people would be able to just take a few deep breaths, maybe realize that Joe Biden being president isn't the end of the world. Take some time to reflect on the fact that the Republican Party did pretty well in this election along with Joe Biden. That maybe it means that not all is lost. But at the same time, I see people who, through no provocation on my end, attack me and say that I am part of a conspiracy. That because I was a poll worker, I engaged in fraud. That I engaged in misconduct, and millions of other people across the country who helped in the electoral system are responsible for some terrible misdeeds because their candidate lost. I find it insulting, frankly, that people who are adults, who I have seen and are responsible in their lives, say things like, I'm acting like I'm in a cult because I don't believe that the president won re-election. Me. I'm in the cult. That there is the world's largest, grandest, most extensive theft of democracy ever in the history of time happening right now. Something that, if it were true, would so fundamentally shake us to the core, I don't know if we could get through it without a constitutional convention. These people are just throwing up the highest imaginable stakes to make it seem like they're more credible, but unfortunately they're not. And all they've done is shown that they have neither no understanding of hyperbole, or that they're willing to make a huge deal out of nothing in a desperate attempt to maintain power. And part of me, the more cynical part of me, the angrier part of me, says, why not just let them crash and burn? Just let them go out into the streets and make idiots of themselves. Let them be mocked, like they mocked so many people 4 years ago. Let them face the consequences of their actions. Let them reap what they sow. Let them face the fact that they are the ones who cannot accept reality, that they are the ones demanding safe spaces, that they are the ones leaving in droves from networks that they had trusted for years to ones that give them a specific idea of the world not based in reality and gives them comfort. And frankly, I think a large part of this is unfairly influenced by the fact that Trump is the president, and then when he is no longer the president, all of a sudden I feel like the dynamic will change. When the actual wheels of power no longer are vested in Trump, the world will look past him, and his ability to gain influence like he did before will not be the same. I can only hope that the Republican Party, as soon as Trump is out of office, does its best to leave that part of history in its proper place, which is to pull the good out, the 4 or 5 good things you could possibly get out of it, the things that could be worked on, and maybe the parts that we need to advance on that Trump was able to get that we didn't, and maybe be able to put up a candidate who is reasonable and polished and can actually give the conservative, working class, Republican country club, new minority coalition a real fighting chance to have a say in our government. Or Donald Trump can sit around in the background for 4 years, teasing whether or not he's going to run again or not, and therefore hijacking the party that he has no right to be in control of anymore. Trying to extort it for money, using his kids to do so. The best thing that they can do is cut themselves off from the Trump family in general. Because I have a feeling that when he no longer has the protections of the office, his life is about to get a whole lot harder. He's going to be faced with people who want vengeance from him. And it may not be the federal government, but I'm sure the state of New York is more than happy to try to ruin the rest of his life. I'm sure there's plenty of people who want to sue him personally for what he's done. And I'm sure that by doing these things, he will no longer be able to have the same leverage that he used to. Because the shocking idea of him winning the presidency gave him the power to set the agenda. And now that he no longer will have power, it is very clear to me that his ability to set the agenda will greatly decrease. And I hope at that point that when they see him flailing and no longer in the trappings of the office and we have to get back to winning in business, that he will get dropped like a bad habit. I can't guarantee the future. I can only hope as a message to my fellow Republicans that, look, I voted for the Republican candidates across the ballot, even ones I didn't necessarily find impressive or care for. But I didn't vote for Trump. And there are millions of people like me in enough places where our vote made the difference. And you can try to call me a traitor. You can try to tell me that I'm the problem, and you can accuse me of the worst type of crimes imaginable. And what I'll tell you, and when I say this sincerely, is that I feel bad for you. I feel pity for you. Because I live in a world where I'm able to accept the facts around me and try to maintain my principles and my consistent measures and be able to move forward in life. And a lot of you will either not be able to move on and be seen as crazy people with grudges. A lot of you will be sold out as the opportunist you are for trying to delay and deny a rightful election. I'm sure some of you will just act like it never happened and disappear and memory hole it. And I'm sure a lot of you will probably just never try to listen to me again because I'm presenting information to you that conflicts with your worldview. And if that's the case, I'm not sorry, because I can't make you be a better member of society. I can ask you to. I can ask you to do some very basic things like accept math for what it is, put a little bit of scrutiny on these very bold, crazy, very unlikely claims being made by people who are doing these things specifically because the sheer size of the lie gives the impression that it may have some validity to it. And I can only hope that you decide to, in this metaphorical sense, slow down the car and listen to the signs before you speed off angrily into the distance and crash. Because I don't want you to crash. I don't want you to feel your whole world collapse around you and face whiplash. I don't want that for anybody. I don't want people to do that to themselves, particularly when it could be avoided, but I really don't think a lot of people have any other choice. I think a lot of people are just going to crash and burn because that's the only way that they'll ever come to terms with reality. You know, the sooner you get there, the better, but the longer it takes, it's only going to be harder for you and harder for America. Like, look, you can say all you want about Joe Biden. He's old, he doesn't know who his grandkids are, he's not there most of the time, he's a Trojan horse for the liberals, whatever you want to say. But you gotta call him president-elect. And if you say that's not a real office, then why was Trump president-elect 4 years ago if it wasn't a real office? Oh, because he actually won the election? Well, why can't it be different now? Oh, wait, now you're being hypocritical. Of course. Everything that they've ever accused the other side of being, they are now engaging in. And unfortunately, a large part of this is all due to the fact that the man in the White House is setting an example for people that this is okay. Because he won, and they feel like that means something. And when I say won, he won in 2016. And almost won again, but he didn't. He lost by a lot, just to be clear. They believe that they're allowed to throw out their grievances without care of who they hurt or what it does, regardless of the factual accuracies of any of it. And they believe that this is their moment to try to maintain power. And the same way that they were salivating in the hours after the election in 2016 and waited for their man to take control of the Oval Office, the same people now desperately cling to the idea that they'll be able to make this work one last time. But they won't be able to, because that's not what happened. Because Joe Biden won the election fair and square. And unfortunately, a large segment of the Republican Party at the current moment doesn't believe that. And I would hate to say that a large part of the Republican Party has no basis in reality, but I don't know how much of the Republican Party is the Republican Party, and I don't know how much of it is people who support Donald Trump. As of right now, those things are kind of one and the same, with the obvious admission that because the president underperformed Republicans, there are enough people who do not support him to take him out of power, but to leave the other people in place. Which to me seems like a totally fine proposition. I believe the president's unique lack of character is part of the reason where we're at today. And sure, that may be part of his charm, and maybe that worked the first time, but it clearly didn't work the second time. And there's nothing that we can do besides wait for him to leave. And you know, it could have been done gracefully, could have been done well, but that's not what he wants, and I don't think that's what many of his people want. No, they want burn it to the ground, reckless, nonsense fighting all the way through, because for them it never was about the continuance of government and respecting the results. It was about feeling like they had power and not wanting to let it go. You know, to go back to my football metaphor, they can use the remaining timeouts. They can try to draw penalties. They can try to run out of bounds to delay the end of the game as long as possible, but at the end of the day, the score is the score, and the time frame does not allow them the mathematical possibility of winning. The only way that Donald Trump would win this election is for him and his allies to break every conceivable law imaginable and to force themselves to create this shadow electoral college to elect him as president or have the House of Representatives theoretically support him. As if anybody who has any understanding of how government works wants to do that for him. The man who cares little for anybody but demands loyalty of everybody wants these people to violate their oaths, the law, their own conscience, and the spirit of democracy itself so that he can maintain a job that he doesn't really even want. The man is just a sad, selfish waste of a presidency. He could have really done something. He could have won a second term and really may have cemented something, but he didn't. He lost by what's likely going to be the largest popular vote spread ever. And if you're saying the popular vote doesn't matter, good point. He's also going to lose the Electoral College by what would likely be the mirror version of this, but the fact that Trump won 304 votes and odds are Joe Biden will win 306 means he won't even actually have won more electoral votes or the same. What will matter is that Trump was able to win based on a low turnout year in 2016, and when given the option to give the people that trust him and the people who don't trust him a reason to support him en masse, he failed in that effort. He didn't drag other Republicans down with him, but he failed. He failed. He failed you. He failed the Republican Party. He failed the office that he holds. And I like to think he failed himself, but I don't think he really ever had an agenda to begin with. I feel like this whole thing was just a giant show for him to maybe enact the 3 or 4 things he maybe actually cared about, to get the praises and the trappings of the office, and to use it against his perceived enemies. And I don't think his presidency will bear the fruit that many people think it will. The notion that he is this rich, patriotic businessman who gave up his fortune and his personal life to save America is a narrative that a lot of people frankly have. But years from now, when his hardest of supporters have passed on, when the Republican Party has ideally moved beyond him, and when faced with the accountability of being a private citizen, I have a pretty good feeling that his influence and pull will degrade over time. For people who are afraid of him staying in office past January 20th, I'd say don't be. If the courts have proven anything, it's that they are not having this. If the electors and the secretaries of state in other places are having their say, they're not having this, despite the death threats and the attacks from their own political party. There's enough people willing to do the right thing so that eventually this presidency will end. And say what you will of President Trump, his ability to get there, and the votes he generated, and his legacy with the Supreme Court, the man himself will be known as somebody who lost the popular vote twice, He'll have been impeached. He'll have never once gotten approval from the majority of the country. He'll be divisive, and he'll be angry, and he will no longer have the trappings of the greatest office in the world to bolster him. And he will have to deal with the consequences of his actions, and his supporters will have to deal with the consequences of those actions. And I don't know what this means going forward, because in 2015, when Donald Trump started, no one was going to vote for him. They never thought he was going to win. Then he won, and then he became president, and then he remade the entire party his image. Could it disappear just as fast? I guess time will tell. When you no longer have the ability to command the media and social media and an army and a political party, when you no longer are able to use the mechanisms of power in a way to benefit you and enough people to keep that going, when it turns out your own incompetence and selfishness is your undoing, you will likely see a man spend the rest of his life teasing, taunting, and fighting, and probably being irrelevant, being alone, and probably just being sad. And frankly, if I were you, Republican Party, conservatives of America who are still in this fight, I can only say that unless you have an extreme interest in the minute technicalities of the end of an election, if you really want to inspire confidence in people, you will tell them and yourself in public and out loud that President-elect Joe Biden will be the next president and that Donald Trump lost. And it does not have to reflect on you, does not have to reflect on your judgment. It is just a matter of the facts of this election. I can only hope that people, if anybody's listening to this and you feel like you cannot trust the news and you cannot trust what you read, and you are growing increasingly frustrated with the lack of evidence from the Trump legal team about what happened, let me tell you, as somebody who does not vote for the Democratic Party, who has consistently spoken up against them in my own capacity here, and who has gone out of his way to talk to people who support the president to the greatest understanding, I'm asking you to check yourself out from doom scrolling, walk around and take some breaths outside, and ask yourself, do you believe that America is headed for a civil war to collapse? Really ask yourself this. Or do you think that maybe, just maybe, that there'll be some tweets, there'll be some anger, but eventually we will be overcome with the pandemic again, a new government will come into power, and then we will deal with it as it comes? Is it possible that Trump will be the second person ever to serve 2 non-consecutive terms? I guess it's theoretically possible. I'd say highly unlikely. I said the faster that we got to examining, taking the few good parts of Trump's presidency, whatever those may be, and trying to build something better for the future, the better it is for everybody. But I don't know. I'm just a guy with a microphone in front of my computer, talking out loud, hoping somebody's listening. And if you do listen, thank you. I know I don't do this as often as I should. Still working on the other podcast ideas I have, but I'm just trying to see where this is going, and I hope that whatever audience I do have eventually kind of picks up in a more significant way. But if not, I'll let you know. But if anything, this is a fun side project where I get to say my thoughts out loud and articulate what I'm thinking, and hopefully if you're listening you might enjoy it. So stay safe, everybody. Have a safe, socially distant, masked up Thanksgiving, Be responsible. Thank you for voting. And I'll see you the next time.